Welcome everybody. Thanks for your time today. We realised the programme's asking to do quite a lot of stuff at the moment, so we know your time is valuable and we'll try and make the best use of the time. So this session is to introduce you to the working draft of the programme plan that's now being consulted on. It is a working draft, so we expect to change quite a lot as it's developed during the consultation period, but the objective is to agree a baseline plan by the end of the year, which is important because at the moment we have the Ofgem timetable, but we haven't really validated it through an industry shared, industry owned programme planning process. So this is really important for us to do. But before I go into any further meeting, I think we have a message from Rachel Clark at Ofgem, who's our programme sponsor.
Hello, I'm Rachel Clark and I'm Deputy Director at Ofgem with responsibility for retail systems and processes. I have been ultimately accountable for the implementation of the switching programme, which has now gone live, and I'm the Ofgem programme sponsor for market-wide half-hourly settlement. I want to take a moment to reflect on the importance of the market-wide half-hourly settlement programme and why we are keen to see it implemented as soon as is practically possible. MHHS is a vital step on the way to increasing the flexibility of the electricity system so that we can decarbonise the energy sector in the most cost-efficient way. As such, it provides an essential underpinning of our ability to meet the UK's net zero commitment. And the more efficient use of the energy system that MHHS will facilitate will help to keep the costs of energy down for all consumers. This is more important than ever before at a time when consumers and businesses are facing unprecedented electricity costs. This is why Ofgem considers it imperative that the industry should ensure that implementation of MHHS is done as quickly as possible. When we introduced obligations on all market participants to act in accordance with the transition timetable that we established in April last year, we wanted to be clear that we expect all market participants to prioritise implementation of MHHS in such a way that they can support a swift implementation. We cannot afford this programme to be held back because some parties do not appreciate the urgency for implementation. As was envisaged, the programme is now carrying out a full plan review to establish a detailed, robust, credible and achievable plan for MHHS implementation. Ofgem supports this plan review. It is essential that the programme has a considered, evidenced and robust plan that all parties can believe in and operate in accordance with. It is also essential that this plan, when finalised, delivers the quickest achievable route to implementation. In support of that, I have asked MHHSP to press all of you on what the minimum timescales are for activities and to look for all possible ways of minimising the time to go live without jeopardising the fundamental requirement for a robust, credible and achievable plan. We expect all programme participants to apply the necessary resources and the necessary priority to implementing MHHS so that this important change can be delivered as soon as possible and start delivering the expected consumer and market benefits. We look forward to continuing to work with you on this critical programme.
Okay, so that's a message from our sponsor. So what we will do now is go through the agenda for today, and this is one of the decks that we're going through that we provided to everybody on Monday. We just want to bring the plan a bit to life. So we'll go through this agenda today. If you could hold questions until later on. We have the last part of the meeting, which is generally about 30 minutes actually, is reserved for Q&A. And then we'll cover that by showing of hands as we go through that section. So if you could hold questions as we go through, because it's quite likely that we may answer those questions as we get through the presentation. And so that's basically the agenda that we'll follow. So if we move on, we'll start with an introduction to the objectives of the planning exercise, the consultation process and the principles that we're following in developing the plan. So slide 5, we'll just settle on this slightly. So as we've said, the objectives of this plan, of this exercise, are to consult on the plan and assess ways that we can deliver this programme as early as possible and preferably no later than the Ofgem timetable. that it is to form a baseline plan that's credible and one that can be supported by Ofgem, but more as importantly, is something that industry has worked with us on and believes can be achieved. So the intention is that we work with industry to develop a plan. We're not intending to develop a plan centrally and impose it on industry. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But the plan as it is so far is just a draft. It's a working plan based on the information that we have at the time of drafting, and it's not been approved by Ofgem. So basically that's the kind of sense in which we're doing this. So if I move on to the next slide, the planning consultation exercise itself is done in a number of stages. We had a pre-consultation stage where volunteer program and project managers from some participants joined with us in looking at the initial plan that we had, and through May to July knocked some rough edges off it as we went through to prepare it for round one of consultation, which is the next 4 weeks, including this one. The objective of round one is to look at a fairly high level plan and if you like, get consensus on and feedback on the structure, the durations of the activities and the sequencing of those activities, to test the high level assumptions and related risks, and also not to focus so much on absolute dates at this stage, because round two will be where we share a more fulsome plan with date timelines, and that's at that point that we start to round out the plan with potentially round three, which is a short 2-week period at the end, subject to BFG's agreement next week. But there's a round two, a round three should be possible post M5. The point I want to make here is that round one is the most important round in this respect. It's the opportunity for all participants to answer the consultation questions that we've provided. There's quite a lot of them, but that's because, as I said, we want to develop this plan with industry. We need your inputs at this stage, because you can influence the plan upstream at this point in terms of its shape and its format and the approach we're taking. If you don't give us your inputs in great detail at this point, it becomes increasingly more difficult for you to influence the plan as we get into round two, where it becomes more detailed and more settled. So the appeal we have is if you're going to put effort into this, and we do ask everybody to answer those consultation questions, then now's the time to do it. And round one, as we get towards the end of round one, we will also reconvene the volunteer group. And just to remind you that if there are project or program managers in your organisations, people who own the planning and the delivery, they are welcome to join the volunteer group if they haven't already done so, to get a bit of the inside track on how we respond to round one feedback and develop a plan for round two. So the option of becoming a volunteer has always been open to all participants, as long as the people who are volunteering are the project or program managers that are responsible for delivery. So that would be important to note, and for you and your organisations to, put out the call for those volunteers if they feel able to do that. We recognise there's a lot going on at the moment, not just with the replan, but with the design and getting that over to M5. But these things have to be done in parallel because they influence one another. So that's the consultation process as it is set out and the objectives of it, and the thing that we need from you at this point. If we move to the next slide, which is you'll have seen this before, many of you. There are some principles that we have been following since we started this process, including the voluntary process. I would just draw your attention to the last one again. It should be an industry-shaped plan. We can't do this without you. We need to get a timeline that's realistic, and we need the backup, the evidence, the input from you to justify why that timeline should be as it is, because we need to make sure that people, including Ofgem, understand that whatever timeline we come up with is the best timeline we can get. And a lot of the questions that we're asking you is about how we can improve the timeline, because what you have at the moment in your hands is a left to right plan. The challenge in round one is to put some pressure on that right to left and see how we can deliver this plan in the most efficient way. Okay, move on, please. We're just briefly going to talk about planning terminology, because we've recognised that whilst a lot of people are familiar with this, not everybody is, and we want to be talking about the same things in this conversation. So if we talk about control points, this was something that we instigated in faster switching, and control points are demarcation points between the key program phases. For example, between DBT and integration testing, there would be a control point making a decision about whether the program can proceed into the next phase. So they are decision points. They're not just checkpoints. They're where we decide whether to stop, pause, or proceed with the program at that stage. It's basically a health check, and it'll be a separate control point review chaired by the program director, and it will look at things like the amount of change that's going on, the amount of risk we're carrying, the suitability of the forward plan, participant readiness. It will also look at refreshing the change and delivery strategies and assessing our progress towards the documented program outcomes that we want to achieve. So it's quite a heavy point in the program where we take a step back and say, are we where we need to be or where we expect to be, and can we continue to proceed? Milestones themselves are just familiar devices to control and focus on delivery activities. And in our working draft of the plan, we provided a milestone register that shows all the key milestones that we have in the plan at the moment, the titles of those milestones, and actually how there are dependencies between milestones. That's all in the milestone register. There's a lot more to be built into that register, but we wanted to keep it relatively light and clean and allow you to get the salient information for round one out of that artifact, rather than cluttering it up with a lot of detail that we don't need feedback on at this stage. Go to the next slide, please. Critical paths and critical threads. So these are paths to destination. Critical path is the path to go live, and critical threads are the path between the end of one phase and the end of the next one. So in both cases, we need to determine the activities that are on those critical paths or threads. And we would focus our delivery tracking and our attention on activities which touch that path, which if they are delayed, would delay the overall phase and delay go live potentially. So these items and these instruments are quite important in the plan. Readiness assessments themselves support the control point and also support other key points in the programme, and they provide a top-down check on participants' readiness, whereas we also do the bottom-up check that the SI does assurance activities on both a design and progress and DBT. So we have two different ways, but readiness assessments are generally operated in a fairly tried and tested way, very similar to the way faster switching did them. But we know that those questionnaires that you fill in for readiness assessments require a certain amount of internal governance, and we try to balance the weight of those questions with the value of the information we're seeking. So trying to get that balance right is always something that we're looking at. So that's readiness assessments. So if we move on to the next section of the deck, we just wanted to make you aware of the artifacts that we're providing you with now and later, just to make sure you're familiar with the approach we're taking. So we provided you with one PowerPoint deck, which is a combination of the plans on a page and the planning grade information. So we've combined artifacts 1 and 6 into one document for ease, and actually to allow you to interpret the plans on a page by looking at the main RAID items, and some of those we'll talk about a bit later in this deck. So that's one of the artifacts. The second one is number 2, the program schedule, and we provided an Excel that identifies the lower level activities, durations and sequences of that schedule as it currently stands. And as I mentioned already, the milestone register. We're not planning to give you the other artifacts at this stage. They're not essentially very helpful, and they're a bit distracting in terms of the high level consultation that we want to effect at the moment, but we will provide those artifacts in round 2. And just as an aside, if you want, whilst the RAID that we provided, the RAID items are related to the plan and the planning, you're always welcome to go into the portal and look at the overall planning of the overall program RAID log, which is now available through the DPMO tool, and you can slice and dice the RAID information on the wider program basis at any point you'd like to do that as background. So these are the way we're going to do it, and the reasons why we've set out some of the artifacts at this stage, and we'll follow up with the remaining ones together with refreshes of the ones we've sent for round 2. Moving on, the other item that's important to think about is actually how the plan is governed. We move the slides on, or if they have been moved on, it hasn't happened yet. Oh, stuck, Daniel. Oh, we're going again. Right, a hierarchy. So talking about how the plan is going to be governed and at what level. Milestones are set at certain tiers. And we've not used the word level because level applies to governance. So a steering group manages tier 1 milestones, and advisory groups manage tier 2 and 3 according to these definitions, which you can read at your leisure. If you look at the next slide, we've basically just clarified that in terms of governance structures. So the level 1 and level 2 governance manages tier 1 milestones. So it's predominantly the program steering group. With Ofgem as the sponsor, should milestones need to be escalated for approval if they get delayed by more than 3 months. And in case Ofgem is part of the PSG. So there'll be that scrutiny at level tier 1, and then at level 3, which are the advisory groups, will manage tier 2 and tier 3 milestones. So when you look at the milestone register, you can understand where those milestones will be governed from. Okay, moving on. This is just a basic slide that tells you how we number the milestones. So we identify the tier and then the work stream or area where the milestone is being delivered, and then a numbering system that follows it. So that's just to provide the logic of how we name the milestones on this program. Moving on. So this is the main part of the presentation. So it's an overview of the working draft of the plan. So what we want to cover in this section is how we're approaching the delivery, what obstacles or potential obstacles or uncertainties there are at this point. And let's be honest, at this point in the plan, there are quite a lot of uncertainties, and we'll speak about how we're going to make those uncertainties less uncertain as we go through this process. And basically to remind you that the plan is a high-level document at the moment, just looking at those, the structure, the approach, the durations and sequencing, and not focus on dates. So moving on, we have the plan on the page for the overall programme. And this plan, the replan, starts from M5. That's basically the trigger for this. And it at a high level, it acknowledges and accommodates the fact that in the early activities for participants, there will be high-level impact assessments, procurement activities, things that some of you may already have done or be doing, but there may be others of you who have not yet started them. So the plan needs to accommodate some time for that. And we've also accommodated the fact that some parties will go through through systems integration testing, and some will not. And the path through to go live is slightly different, which is what Kate will describe in a few minutes' time. We've outlined central systems separately because those are on the critical path. And the assumptions we made about participants' DBT are based on a range of feedback we've had from volunteers through the planning working group, recognising the fact that there are 1 or 2 parties that said it would take longer or less time, but predominantly these are the timelines that were fed back to us through the volunteer participants. And what we've done is we've set the DBT that relates to the system interface with them, MHHS, as critical path, and we've taken the back end DBT off the critical path because there's enough time during SIT to accommodate the DBT for consequentially impacted systems. Then those activities might not be sequential. In fact, they may overlap, but we try to differentiate what's on the critical path and what's not. We've also outlined qualification testing, and at the moment we'll cover it in more detail later. But just to say that it starts when a certain point of SIT is reached, but it doesn't wait until the end of SIT. And migration and go live are based on assumptions, quite broad and arguable assumptions at the moment about how migration and go live may happen. And again, we'll talk about this later on, or Kate will speak about this later on, but we are expecting to settle some of these areas of uncertainty a little better before we get into the round 2 consultation and the version of the plan that we'll provide at round 2. So I'm going to stop speaking now, and I think at this stage, Kate's probably got a bit more to talk through this slide on before she progresses into the rest of the contents.
Thanks, Keith. Yeah, I'll talk through a few things on this slide, and then we'll dive down into some of the detail. And you've got the full detail on the Excel spreadsheet, and you can expand the activities there so you see all the detailed activities. So what we've done on this one is just try to represent at a very high level the main things, you know, particularly those going on the critical path. And as somebody pointed out in a session yesterday, we haven't highlighted the code change milestones on this, which it would be useful if we did that. Obviously, they're important and they're necessary, but the real determinant of how long is this program going to take is not the code change. It's, as you can see on here, it's going to be how long is it going to take to develop and build and test all of the systems, put them together and test them, then do qualification and so on. So just some things about what's on here. So right at the bottom, you've got what we call the phases of the program, and you've got control points that separate them, as Keith has remarked. And we've got, so the phases more or less correspond to what's going on in that phase. You've got system design and build, which is different from end-to-end design, which is what we've been doing up until now and will continue to do till October. So it's called system design and build, with the intention that, you know, it's your systems, central market infrastructure systems and so on. And then we've got integration testing, which starts at the minute SIT starts, and it ends when qualification starts, even though, as Keith said, there's a bit of an overlap between SIT and qualification. So we drop into what we call the qualification testing phase when qualification starts, and then SIT, you know, the tail end of SIT just carries on. And again, we drop into what we've called the migration period as soon as the first segments go live, because not all segments go live at the same time. And again, you know, qualification testing will carry on into the migration period, but we've, in terms of program phasing with control points to control the entry into a new phase, we drop into migration when migration very first starts, not when it's started for all segments. And we've got the milestones at the top, which correspond to the milestones on the Ofgem transition timetable. And then we've got essentially 4 swim lanes here, which are not represented in the detailed plan, but it's useful from the point of view of the graphic to see what's the path through for those participants who are going to undertake SIT with us. What's the path for non-SIT participants, because that's got quite different timescales if you are just going straight into qualification. At the bottom, you've got the central systems, and then all of that comes together in swim lane 3, where we do cut over a migration and end up at M15, which is the end of migration, and M16, which is the cut over to the new settlement timetable, which we've put in the plan as a couple of months later than M15. I think in the Ofgem transition timetable, they were coincident, but we've spaced them out a bit to give a bit of settling down space and preparation for converting to the new timetable. So that's what's in our working draft of the plan. So if we start with the SIT participants, the first thing that we've put up here is that participants, once the design has been signed off, will be finishing off impact assessments that many of you have already started. There'll be planning going on, and that will be planning at a high level for the whole programme, as well as at a more detailed level for the immediate few months or for the first year that's going to happen. And there may also be procurement activities that you need to undertake if you need to engage a new service provider or maybe renew contracts with an existing one. So what we've done is we've said that the critical path goes through that exercise, but once the planning is done, then you can drop into design, build and test. And if there is some procurement activities that carry on that overlap with design, build and test, well, that's fine. But the critical path is that you've done your planning and then your impact assessment, and you drop into design, build and test. And what we've said here is important to see what we're saying is in the DBT. So we've said market interfaces and services. In other words, metering services, data services, registration services, network operations, and UMSO. And what we've done in this plan in order to try to give ourselves a realistic time frame and to make sure that we can achieve things in the most efficient way possible is we've separated out development into market interfaces and services and said, okay, this is what we need in order to get into SIT. And anything that's in suppliers' back-end systems, so your CRMs, your billing systems, your customer correspondence, all of that stuff, we don't need that for SIT. You can do that later. Now, should you be participating in SIT, you know, we've got them as sequential. It's entirely up to you. You could start the back-end systems development earlier. If you think it won't take you very long, you could back-end it a bit, whatever. But we've split it up so that there's enough of the components in SIT for us to do meaningful SIT, and meaningful SIT is all about being able to test the end-to-end MHHS solution. That's not testing the end-to-end solution from a supplier's point of view, it's from the point of view of the MHHS design. So it's testing according to the scope of the diagram that Simon Harrison has produced, which shows the scope of the design in a pink shape across the whole landscape of all of the systems. So we've got dropping into SIT. Oh, sorry, I should say that we've allowed 12 months for the DBT of the interfaces and services, and that's pretty much in line with the information that we gathered from the planning working group meetings. We've then got SIT execution. Now, what this disguises is that there are different stages within SIT. So you've got SIT functional, you've got SIT non-functional, and there are others as well. And what we do is that once we've got to a certain point, which is a defined point, it's not just a, you know, oh, well, we think it's okay by this point. It's and you can see the detail of that if you look in the Excel spreadsheet that underpins all this. You can see what exactly we intend to finish before we get into other things. So we get at a certain point in SIT, we say, okay, SIT participants, assuming that you've been participating successfully and you've done the tests as planned, and they're all, and they've passed, and the defect mask is okay, and all of those things. Here's the sandbox environment. Go do your own testing, and that's an important thing. And I'm thinking that it's a particularly important thing for you guys. I think less so for small suppliers, but for medium and large suppliers, it's an important thing because you are going to want to validate that all your business processes, all your back-end system changes, all of that stuff, that it all works seamlessly so that you have a really good transition into live on MHHS. So we've got several months on that. And then we've got SIT execution can carry on, and you won't be needed necessarily right to the end of SIT execution. I think what we're thinking now is that you won't be needed for SIT operational, that will just be the the SI and the DIP provider doing that. But for a lot of the rest of SIT, we'll be asking for participation. And then when you've had a fair time in the sandbox, we drop into preparation for go live. And I'll talk a little bit about this in a minute, but basically we've said that the advanced and unmetered segment will cut over to live first. And here they are. And then they've got a 13-month migration period. And then the smart and non-smart will cut over 2 months after that. And they've got an 11-month migration period. So central systems, similar sort of thing, 12 months to do DBT after some initial planning, which we didn't put on there. But, you know, the central systems differ in where they're at. And by central systems, just for clarity, what we mean is the Elexon central systems. We mean the DCC systems, in other words, smart metering, which is mainly DSP is subject to change, and CSS. We also mean EES because there are some changes to that. There are some data items being added, and that's it. Now, obviously, we need more for SIT than that. We need some DNOs and IDNOs as well. We need data services and suppliers. But those are the central, what we regard as central systems. Oh, sorry, the DTN and the DIP obviously are central systems as well. Okay, so then what happens if you're a participant who is not intending to join us in SIT? Well, the answer is you've got the same period up front for impact assessment, planning, etc., etc. And then you get on with your DBT. Now, what we've put in here as DBT of market interfaces and services, and then DBT of back-end systems, it's a bit arbitrary. You know, it's really up to you how you do that. But the main point about it is that whatever you're doing, you need to be ready to qualify at this point or somewhere shortly after, you know, after when qualification starts. And then you need to allow yourself enough time to get through the qualification such that you can then go live with the relevant segment or segments that you operate in. And the same thing about cut over to live applies. Qualification. So qualification has got a lot of questions that need answering. And one thing that I would say to you is if you get a chance, it would be very, very useful to have your input in the qualification working group that's starting up next week. So the first meeting is on Tuesday, and we are, the initial meeting is just to set things going, set the terms of reference, and run through some of the questions that we need to be addressing over the next you know, over the coming few months. And some of those questions are really quite fundamental, like, for example, are we talking about qualification or are we talking about requalification? We need to work with the BSc PAB and the other and with the other codes as well, with the SEC and the REC, to ensure that we have a kind of a unified view on what constitutes qualification, because not all of the roles are subject to the BSc. The MDR role isn't, for example. So there's quite a kind of complex picture as far as qualification goes. There's other questions about the scope of it and questions about things like what unit do you qualify in? So on what I mean by that, for example, is do you have to qualify as an entire smart data service, or can you qualify as a processing service within that, and that, you know, potential adapters and things are separate? So there are quite a few questions to be answered on that. One thing, just to give you a little bit of an introduction to the way that we see qualification working at the moment, and again, you know, this is all subject to the working group, but what we are thinking is that there'll be 3 parts to qualification. The first part will be that you will be required to do certain things and evidence them in your pit, and that in order to get out exit pit successfully, you need to have got a tick in the box with regard to those exit criteria. Then the qualification execution that we're talking about here is executing a predetermined number of tests, which will vary according to your role, on the UIT environment. So, you know, you'll be given a time to turn up. And again, we really don't, we think that there will be some kind of tranching applied to qualification, so that certain participants have, you know, you go early, certain go in the middle, certain go later, and that you'll be assigned a place in which to do your qualification. But we don't yet know the details of how that will work. So that's another question. So you do your qualification testing on the UIT system, and again, you have to evidence what you've done, and then get a tick in the box at the end of that. And so, you know, that's relatively straightforward. It's pretty similar to faster switching with the UEPT. It's similar to smart metering. So the thing that's a little bit different is that we would like to understand in some way, and again, yet to be determined, we would like to understand and see some evidence that your business processes and the systems that support your new business processes or the changes to business processes, that they're in there and that they're working well. And, you know, particular things that we're thinking of are things like exceptions processing for the migration. How are you going to handle that? Because there will be some MPANs where the data isn't of sufficient quality to be migrated. What's your process for that? How is it going to work? Is it going to be robust enough? Is it going to deal with volumes? So it's things like that that we would want to see. And that kind of third element is something that we're thinking at the moment. Maybe, you know, you could either perform some tests and demonstrate some things on the UIT environment, or you could do it on your own standalone environment, up to you. But that would be, you know, a third part. And obviously those 3 parts happen in sequence. That first of all, you do your pit, then you do your basic qualification testing, and then there's some further testing of your back end systems. Then what we've got is that for participants who are going the qualification route and not SIT, you'll be able to use the sandbox at a slightly, you'll be able to start using it once you've done your initial qualification. So not when you've proved your back end systems. And the idea is that you can use the sandbox to prove your back end systems. That's fine. So you will have access to the sandbox a little bit after the SIT participants. And, you know, one of those things is we do want to encourage some participation in SIT. You know, if we don't get participation in SIT, we're not going to validate this design in a robust way. And after all that, you know, that's what we need to do. SIT is all about making sure that what's been designed is working. You know, does that design work? Maybe there were things that weren't thought of. And then qualification is all about you proving that your systems can handle the new arrangements. And then again, you know, you just come down into preparation for cut over to live in the same way. So just looping back to SIT, because I didn't really talk about that. So there are various things that we need to do in order that participants can make the decision as to whether they are going to participate in SIT with us. Now, obviously, you've got to make sure that you have done development of the right things in time. And in order to do that, you need to have done your planning. So what we are thinking is that we, between now and over the coming few months, we're going to be having conversations in working groups as well as with participants on an individual basis about whether they are interested in coming into SIT. We would really, really be very keen to have at least one medium supplier in SIT with us. We've got some possibilities from the large suppliers. I haven't yet really got to grips with which of you as medium suppliers might be interested in that, but we would be really keen to see at least one of you coming in with us. We need to specify what the entry criteria are, and we will do that over the coming months. You need to do your planning. You need to see what appetite you have for it. And we're intending that when you finished your planning, sort of, the initial 4 or 5 months, that's the kind of time when we will try to crystallize who is going to be in SIT and who isn't. And, we do have a concern that people will be reluctant to invest in that, because obviously that is going to be, it's going to entail certain additional costs, because you have to be ready more quickly. But, there are equally business benefits. It means you can get into the sandbox earlier, and we'll talk about migration in a minute. So on migration. So what we've assumed for the purposes of this plan is something that's subject to a certain amount of debate, as Keith said. It's being debated at the moment. We are looking at various different options to change it, but I'll explain what we've decided on and why. So the whole idea about how migration is handled was the subject of a lot of work last year, and I think probably even back in 2020, by the CCDG, which was, I think, the Code Change and Design Group, or Code Change and Development Group. And also the way that we do migration was kind of laid out in the Ofgem transition timetable. And what the CCDG envisaged was that we would go live with advanced and unmetered first, and that's what we've got in our plan. And then you've got smart coming on a bit later. What was it also envisaged in CCDG, which we haven't got in the plan, is that there would be a period once migration for advanced started. Once the migration window for advanced started, there would be a period of 3 or 4 months over which participants could put their systems live. And the critical thing was that all participants must have their new systems and processes live by the milestone M14 that you can see there, because that is the point where all participants are able to accept new MPANs, new as in new registration, or new to them as a result of a COS, able to accept new MPANs under the new arrangements. So no MPAN would switch or be newly registered on the old arrangements from that point. Now, what we've said is that actually we're going to put advanced live, all of the participants in advanced are live on the same date. And actually we're putting all of the participants in unmetered live on the same date as well, which is the same date as the advanced. And that we're putting all smart participants live on the same date 2 months later. The reason for that is that if you have a period of 3 or 4 months where some participants are live in any given segment and others aren't, you have the problem of, you could have an MPAN which has been migrated to the new arrangements with supplier A, and then that consumer wants to switch to supplier B, who's not yet on the new arrangements. And that would entail essentially reversing out and going back to the old arrangements. Now, there's no allowance in the design for that. And what was envisaged by the CCDG at the time was that there would be, in that period, there wouldn't be a reversal, but there would be a restriction in consumer choice, so that once an MPAN had been migrated to the new arrangements, that consumer could only switch to suppliers already on the new arrangements. Now, various stakeholders are not very happy with that because of the restriction, because of the impacts on consumers. So we are looking at a way of providing this kind of phased bringing in of participants, where participants can go live over a period of months rather than having to go live on a given date for a segment. We are looking at how this can be done. And one possibility is that we introduce an extra piece of design work, which then has to be built, which is to build in this reversal, so that you, during that few month period, you can actually have an MPAN on the new arrangements switching back to the old arrangements. That's one possibility. There are others. But because that's not there yet, what we wanted to do was capture something in the plan which is consistent with the design the way it is. And that is this solution, which is all advanced go live on a given date, all unmetered go live on a given date, and the same for smart. Now, just to clarify one thing for some of you who may not have been very intimately involved in the program, when we say cut over to live, what we mean at that point is your new systems are live and you can start accepting MPANs on the new arrangements. It doesn't mean that you've all in one fell swoop, you've switched all of your existing MPANs. That is what happens over the migration period. And you can see the migration period for advanced and unmetered is 13 months and for smart is 11. So there's the distinction between going live with your new arrangements and being able to accept MPANs on the new arrangements, and then gradually, bit by bit, over the period doing the migration. Now, doing the migration is actually quite a tricky process, and that will be controlled by the MHHS programme, and particularly by us as the SI, because what we need to take into account is we need to make sure that, for example, no given supplier does such huge volume in one day that it knocks over an MPRS system because there are too many change of agent flows going through, for example. And, you know, the same applies to trying to smooth out volumes for agents who are exiting the market or agents who are coming into the market. So there are an awful lot of considerations for controlling that migration. Right, I think that's about that. That was a lot on that slide, but I think it's helpful to see it in the context of the whole programme. So let's go on to the next one. So here you've just got more detail. You've got the next level of detail down from that high level diagram. And you can see that we've got the critical thread going through the programme participant planning, and then down into DBT, and then eventually preparation for SIT, and then the start of SIT at the end of this phase. So go down to the next one, Danielle. So I'm not going to talk through all of this. I'll just pick out a few things. So under the key issues heading, we've got transition design will not be ready by M5. Now, a lot of some of the terminology is being used interchangeably. So you will find references to transition and migration, which are being used interchangeably in the program. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to move towards standardizing things. So migration is the period towards the end of the program where MPANs are being moved over onto the new arrangements. And transition is everything that happens from now until the new settlement timetable comes into effect. So, for example, transition encompasses some things that are happening with CP 1558, for example. There are new data items, there's data cleansing to do, things like that. So the design for how MPANs are going to move over is not ready yet. The design, we're well aware of this. The design team are going to be working on this as quickly as possible. And the kind of the bones of it are understood. So it will be captured and will be discussed in working groups. Going down to assumptions, I think you all know that you're responsible for your pits. No dip environment will be provided for participants ahead of sit. Okay, well, it won't. What I didn't say, and what isn't on the high level plan, is that we are going to provide some testing aids to help you in your pit. And there are two things that we're going to do. One is we're going to produce a simulator which will simulate some of the functionality of the dip, such that you can, so initially what we're doing is we're looking to mimic, if you like, the interactions that you'll have with the LSS and with the MDS, because obviously those are two key things, the interactions between the data services and those. So if you are developing a data service or acquiring a data service and wanting to test it, then we will provide simulation that will help with that. And that's under development at the moment. The other thing that we're doing is around test data. So the whole philosophy was really, what isn't there at the moment? What are people likely not to have? And what can we build once that lots of people can use? And that was where we picked on, okay, well, lots of people will be able to make use of having a sort of if you like, a fairly simple dummy LSS and a dummy MDS at the end of, you know, a URL to mimic that behavior. And the other thing that we thought was test data, consumption data in bulk. So we're going to produce some tools which, for advanced and smart, we're not doing it for unmetered. For advanced and smart, we will you know, given a certain request, which gives us a list of MPANs and some meter technical details and some other parameters, like we want this MPAN to not be returning any reads, or, you know, various different things like that. We will produce realistic test data in quantities. And that will be in a very simple format. It could be a CSV file. I don't really know. We've got to investigate that a bit more. So those are the two things that we're going to make available for your pits. They won't be available right now. They'll be available at a time that is appropriate in time for you to do pit testing in accordance with your delivery schedules. Okay, I'm not going to talk through anything else, I don't think, on that. So let's go on to the next one. Okay, so integration testing. So this starts at the beginning of SIT. You can see here there's a single line for SIT execution. If you look at the Excel, which has got more details of SIT in it, then you'll be able to see the different stages, how they interrelate, and so on. And then the next control point is all about the start of qualification. Okay, so go down to the next slide, Danielle. So again, looking at issues here, we need to validate that. So there are certain things on the plan that we do need to do a bit more due diligence on, and your thoughts on this via the consultation are going to be really valuable. So we need to do a bit more validation of the period that we've allowed for SIT. So we've got 18.5 months for SIT. We need to be sure that that's realistic and achievable, and that we can't do it any faster than that, because obviously there's this challenge that this is an important program and we need to be delivering it as quickly as possible. We don't have any firm volunteers for SIT, partly because we need to define what we need. We have been talking to certain people. We would welcome any conversations from any of you around likely participation. So if any of you think you might like to participate, get hold of the PMO and they will pass the message on, and you can open a discussion with me and with Adrian Clark, with Adrian Ackroyd about possible participation. Yeah, and then we've got a risk about potentially too few participants for SIT. Well, we are trying to manage that by having conversations with people between now and the next few months. Yeah. Okay, next, I think, Danielle. So here you can see this is qualification. This is the qualification phase. You can see that SIT execution carries on and qualification goes on until we get to the start of the 1-year migration for UMS and advanced, milestone 11, and the load shaping service being switched on, which is M13. We've got the central systems going live a month before the start of migration for unmetered and advanced. And we've got that just so that there's a period where they can be in stable live running before we add any more changes. Now, what we haven't done at this level is we haven't distinguished between when the different central systems are going live, and they will go live at different times. The Elexon central systems are their development's already well advanced. DSP, have got their development well planned out and so on. So they may well go, some of them may well go live in advance of that, but that's the latest date. Next one, Danielle. So qualification testing uncertainties. Yeah, we've talked a bit about that in the issues and assumptions. Yeah, so this question about whether it's complete qualification or re-qualification is one of the first questions we have to answer. The duration of qualification testing is something that we need to validate as well. We are talking to the PAB about that. We need to open conversations with SECUS and with RECCO on qualification and make sure it's all lined up. And risks, yeah, full, as we said, and we're not yet really sure how long a participant will take to go through qualification. There's a significant procedural element, which can go on in the background, but contributes to the overall time. So it could be a 6-month elapsed time, but that's not all actually doing testing. That's some where processes being validated. Now, what I realize I haven't described about qualification is who does what. So again, we're trying to clarify roles and responsibilities to nail them down to be really sure. But what we're working to at the moment is that the main bulk of qualification is managed and overseen, and everybody gets a tick in the box given to them by the BSc PAB. Obviously, you know, Rec and Sec come into it, but most of it is BSc PAB. So no change there, that's what happens. However, we on the programme are on the hook to define what that qualification consists of, and, you know, pull together the threads from the different codes. So we need to nail that down fully with the PAB, and we've started to do that. Okay, next, I think. Migration. Again, yeah, I mean, this level of diagram shows broadly, you know, an activity like SIT or migration or whatever. You'll get much more information into the next level of detail. One thing I haven't explained, and I should have done, is what you're seeing on this chart. So what you've got is you've got each task, and these are the high level rolled up tasks. And then you can see the duration on the right, and that's in months. And what you've got in the columns next to the task name are months. And the first one is, when does this task start? And that start date is expressed as how many months after M5, i.e. the design sign off. How many months after M5 does this task start? And then the finish is how many months after M5 does this task finish? So on the first one here, on qualification part 1, you can see it starts at 41 months and ends at effectively 43. Therefore, it's a 2-month elapsed duration. Next, Danielle, I think. Okay, so just a little bit about migration. We've talked about the approach and the CCDG and why we've assumed what we've assumed in this plan, and the fact that that is subject to work that's ongoing at the moment. And then the assumptions about there's no reverse migration in the plan at the moment. Yeah, and then there are risks associated with what we've already discussed. So I think that's fine. So I think that's it for running through the plan. Then I think it's back to you, Keith. Yes,
there's one last slide, which is just a reminder that for some people it's helpful to know there's the interactive program glossary on the portal. So we've given you the link to it in case anybody struggles with acronyms in the way that I do. So just a reminder that there is that, and that's been there for quite a long time now, and it's building up over time as well. So you may find that useful. Right, so thank you, Kate. I think the thing I'd like to say at this stage is that you'll recognise that we put out in round 1 consultation a plan which still has, as I said earlier, and as Kate has reinforced, a number of areas of ambiguity, but we could have waited to consult with you on the plan when we'd established a lot more certainty about these things. But we felt that it was important to involve industry upstream in the process as much as we're able to help you, help us to together build the plan, and to get your views on the thinking that you'd like to, you know, share with us on some of these topics before they become less ambiguous. So this is a great opportunity to say at the beginning of round 1 is where things are not settled and where you have an opportunity to settle them. And actually, you know, we think that's a better way around to do things than coming to you with something that is more constrained and more solid. So it's really an opportunity now for everybody to tell us what they think about some of these subjects as we start to do, as Kate says, our own due diligence on some of these things, and we start to speak with parties about how we might settle the situation or the go live approach, migration approach. You know, tell us what you think. Tell us what you're thinking. I know you're doing that through the working groups, but through the consultation questions, you're able to put this down in a way that helps us build a body of evidence to support whatever the timeline turns out to be based on the further planning activity. And if the timeline is longer than the existing timetable, then we need to be able to prove why it is, and we need to demonstrate that we've done all the thinking to accelerate the delivery as much as we possibly can, but whilst not taking on more risk than is manageable. So hopefully you've got the message across that. So we've reached the point now where in the last 20 minutes, it is available for anybody to ask questions. We've done it previously by just a show of hands and taking the hands as they get raised. But we're here to do that. On Monday, we have some drop-in sessions for people to just turn up whenever they feel like it in those sessions and ask questions as well. So if you don't feel ready and you need a bit more time to look at the documents before asking questions, that's fine as well. But anyway, we are here and happy to answer any questions that might occur to you right now. I get the impression that quite a few constituents are probably going to pick up on this session via the recording. We don't have that many constituents here, which is fine as well.
Right, questions or comments? Any particular observations, really?
Anybody found it useful? Has it been helpful to get you up to speed on what the plan's all about, for example? I think we shot into submission, Kate.
Yeah, I know it's too late on a Thursday afternoon.
Isn't there? There's a lot in it, and we just wanted to try and give you a bit of a, prime the pump a bit and give you some sense of what our thinking was and why we did it this way and where we've got to and where we haven't. So hopefully the message has got across. I hope many of your fellow constituents will pick up on the recording in the coming days. And as I say, on Monday, there's some drop-in sessions where people can just come along, having maybe thought about it a bit further and questions forming. Other than that, just please do answer the consultation questions we sent out. There are quite a lot of them, but they're specific enough to give us real value if you a sense of your thinking on some of these subjects, because we don't want to be doing this in a darkened room by ourselves. That's not what this program's about.
Absolutely.
Great. Well, in that case, thank you for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
And, anything else you can fire at the PMO mailbox if you've got some specific things you want to mention, and they will make sure it gets to the right person in the team. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot. Bye.
Thanks both.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.